Hello, I'm Chris Lee, joined by Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16. We are here to preview Ole Miss's matchup with North Carolina, which blew out San Diego State in Dayton on Tuesday night, setting up a Friday game with Ole Miss 3:05 Central in Milwaukee. You can catch that one on TNT. Looks like almost a toss-up according to predictive metrics. Ken Palm, I think, has got Ole Miss by a point. Blake, give me your initial thoughts on North Carolina and Ole Miss in this one, and maybe particularly on North Carolina, which had maybe its most impressive performance of the year on Tuesday night.
Well, I mean, listen, you can say anything you want about whether North Carolina should have been in the field or not. That's all out the window now because whether you think it or not, it doesn't matter because they came out and just said, "Hey, take that," because they just completely took it to San Diego State. I mean, they win 95-68. They're up 40 in the second half, 40 in an 11 versus 11 game here for a team that many people said shouldn't be in the tournament, ourselves included. But they go 14-24 from three, 21-24 from the free throw line. They literally dominate every statistical area. And it's like, okay, well, now we can't sit here and look at North Carolina as a team that, all right, they just lucked their way into the field. Whatever you think, it doesn't matter. You have to go by performance now. And if you look at performance, well, they look pretty good. And I think it's something where, hey, I said I was very high on Ole Miss coming into this tournament as a team that could be, sleeper-esque in terms of maybe, making a run here and those kind of things. But if you also pull up some of the advanced data, one of the things I think that's very interesting with North Carolina, and I'm going to pull it up here in terms of our friend Bart Torvik here. I mean, if you filter the teams by how they played over the past month, going back to February 16th is what I filtered it earlier this week. North Carolina's playing like the number 14 team in the country. They're 14th in his metrics over the past month. So they're playing really well. And so there are only two losses to Duke since February 10th, and they come out and get a 40-point lead over San Diego State and end up winning by, 27. It's not the easiest setup in the world for the Rebels here.
Yeah, well, and we go back to preseason rankings in the AP poll. Carolina was 8. Again, that is the blueprint of a kind of team you don't want to play. RJ Davis was preseason All-American and had not been as good as he was in Tuesday when he was 6 for 6 from three-point range. Elliot Cadeau, sophomore guard, beside him in the backcourt, very good player. Villain Lubin was maybe the second best player at Vanderbilt a year ago. He's been a reserve on this team a lot of the year. Ian Jackson, McDonald's All-American. So talent here, but you know what? Ole Miss has got some talent too. And one reason I've been high on the Rebels is Sean Padula and Malik Dia have just played so well over the course of the SEC season. Padula is that ingredient that you want to start with, that point guard that's just intelligent, makes big shots, smart with the ball. So I think that the backcourt matchup between he and what they've got at Carolina is a place that I'm going to start watching this one.
Sure. I mean, I think that's the easiest place to look and be like, all right, we talk about experience mattering and all this other stuff. Ole Miss third in D1 experience in this one. Obviously, that's helped by the fact that we mentioned they've just got old guards, and Morrell's been there a while. Padula's done his thing this year. But then you look over and all the big games that those guys have played in. I mean, specifically, look at how many big games Davis has played in the spot, and it showed against San Diego State. Like, this guy's never going to back down from these kind of moments, I think. And it's a lot of fun to look at that statistical matchup there between those two. And I think that's going to play into which of these teams, runs their offense the most effectively. I mean, they're both top 30 in offensive efficiency. Ole Miss, we've always said this season, they just are tremendous at taking care of the ball. You can kind of rely on them not to make those kind of mistakes. It's going to beat themselves. Meanwhile, North Carolina is pretty good at that too, but one of the differences is that Ole Miss forces a lot more turnovers because we've said, that was kind of the combination that's made me high on this Ole Miss team in a win and go home setting is that they don't beat themselves. They do a great job of making the other team beat themselves when they force turnovers. So I think that's clearly one of the key areas here. when we talk about this game. Can Chris Beard's defense work its magic the way that we've seen it do, a lot this season? If they can, then that's a big step number one towards slowing down this North Carolina team that, like I mentioned, they're playing really well right now.
Yeah, I think consistency has just been an issue with Ole Miss. Now, maybe some of that has been, you mentioned earlier Matt Morrell, who's been a stalwart for Ole Miss basketball for several years now. He's not played as much as he normally does, but again, he's played a lot of ball. I'm looking on the Ken Palm thing because where the red and the green collide, or where sometimes matchups tilt. Ole Miss sends people to the foul line a whole lot, so whistle going to be important there. UNC, okay at getting to the line, not great, kind of close to average. And then on the other side, Ole Miss just does not hit the offensive glass, and Carolina does a decent job of protecting it. Ole Miss, as you mentioned, also doesn't turn it over. Carolina doesn't force turnovers. So not a lot that's just glaring when you look at the style components of these teams. Blake, is there anything that you're picking up other than maybe fouls that you see as key?
No, I don't think, again, there's just anything just so completely obvious. I mean, like I said, there are certain areas where you can see some of these teams have a potential advantage, and I feel like with a lot of the SEC teams, we're going to always bring up just free throws in terms of, the teams are good at getting to the free throw line because there were a lot of free throws shot in the SEC. But overall, I think, again, Ole Miss's ability to knock down some shots from outside, North Carolina can do the same. This is, I'm like, this feels like a guards game, right? Because it's kind of interesting, isn't it, Chris? The the matchup inside, you've got two former Vanderbilt centers who are teammates that are matching up against each other in Malik Dia and Van Allen Lubin. So I think that's kind of one of those fascinating tidbits here where you've got these two guys, on opposite sides. And I think that is kind of fun, too, to look at when we talk about, the guards are going to get a lot of the attention. But I think when you look at Van Allen Lubin, Withers, those guys versus, the duo that we see on the other side. I mean, Jamin Brakefield, how many times have we said, is just a guy that seems like he always kind of flies under the radar a little bit. Had a really hot stretch there towards the end of SEC play. It was really, he was really consistent in SEC play. I don't think we probably gave him enough credit for that. But then, of course, we know what Malik Dia is capable of. We talked about it. So, yeah, I love this matchup. I think these are two where, I'm not saying Ole Miss fans are probably just thrilled that they saw North Carolina play the way that they did against San Diego State. But I think, if you want a good matchup, like with these two teams, seemingly, I thought Ole Miss found some things in the SEC tournament that they can sort of ride in here with a little momentum. Yeah, like this is, I love this matchup between these two teams.
Yeah. By the way, correction on that. They were not teammates. They missed each other by 1 year at Vanderbilt.
Off 1 year.
Yeah. And I thought that when I said it, but I needed to double check it. Dia to me is kind of the wild card for Ole Miss. You go back to, and this just illustrates the up and down nature. February 4th, he scored 16 against Kentucky, then gets 1 against LSU, then gets 18 against South Carolina. They won all 3 games. He started off SEC play like gangbusters, 21, 19, and 23 in games 2, 3, and 4 of conference play. He's a guy who can step out. He shoots almost a set shot. A big guy. He's just kind of an unusual player. Like, if he's really on, Ole Miss is very tough to beat.
Yeah, and they're going to need him. Like I said, I think based on the matchup, they're going to need him to have a big game here because – those guys have, I don't necessarily, streaky may be too strong of a word, but I think, again, like you need your best here, in my opinion, from both Dia and Brakefield. The guards are obvious. Like, we know that. Like, it is going to be a game where you could see Padula or Davis just take over, and all of a sudden that's your game. One of those guys just does that. But I think, you need that level of consistency here from both Dia and Brakefield because we know they're going to get a lot of minutes in this particular spot. So, it's going to be kind of fun to see, which of those guys maybe has sort of that breakout type moment in an NCAA tournament setting here.
We ready for picks?
Go for it. I'm glad you're picking first. By the way, I do have Max's pick, so I'll give Max's pick first, okay?
Sure.
Max is going to go with North Carolina.
which is an interesting departure because you guys have had Ole Miss as an Elite Eight team at various points of the year, just as a gut feel. Coincidentally, I was not there with you. I looked at the bracket. I've had Ole Miss in my Elite Eight for a while. Now, having said that, North Carolina doing what it did last night made me take a second look. It is a very talented team. If you go by the preseason criteria, the top 10 AP, stuff like that, there's a lot of reason to pick North Carolina. And boy, this is a team that, you wonder sometimes a team gets a second lease and they can flip the calendar and just say, hey, look, the regular season with the regular season, we're starting fresh. Sometimes a team will find a new life there, like Carolina did a couple years ago. I'm going to stick with Ole Miss as my pick. I don't have a strong feeling about it. I do think Sean Padula, to me, is the kind of guy that can win you a lot of games in March, and that combined with, I thought, a potentially favorable draw for Ole Miss in its half of the bracket, had me taking Ole Miss to the Elite Eight. I'm going to stick with that. Don't feel great about it, but I'll go with it.
Yeah, we all know. I mean, I think, by the way, Max, too, I think we both changed our picks on this game, I think, since we kind of realized this would be the matchup, and we've gone back and forth on this. But, yeah, I think for the longest time I was saying, hey, this Ole Miss, feels like they're built like an Elite Eight type team, just based on their profile, the old guards, having, the consistency you think you're going to get out of them defensively. It's a Chris Beard coach team. You just kind of like them in those sort of spots, right? And then, again, you kind of look at this from that perspective, and it is one where I think anytime we're making picks for the SEC teams in this field, it's so hard because they're finally getting away from each other, and we don't know how it's going to impact those teams other than what we saw in non-conference play. If you go back to it, Ole Miss had some good wins, right? They beat BYU in overtime. They lost to Purdue at the buzzer. They just steamrolled Louisville on the road. So I think those are all things, that kind of sit in their favor when we talk about getting away from it. Now, North Carolina played basically a top 5 non-conference strength of schedule. They didn't win a lot of those games. They lost by 3 at Kansas, 13 to Auburn and Maui, lost by 3 to Michigan State in overtime, lost by 15 at home to Alabama, 6 to Florida, neutral court, lost by they beat UCLA by 2. And then, of course, you look at their body of work in ACC play. Who was their best win in ACC play, Chris? I mean, it was SMU?
Wake Forest? Well, that was
SMU.
The tournament. SMU, yeah.
It was SMU, and that was, their fourth ACC game of the season. I keep forgetting they played one back in early December. But so it is like one of those things, right? It's which one do you weigh the most here? And to me, I was all in on the Ole Miss Sweet 16 Elite Eight run. But how many times have we seen this happen where you see a team that some people think did not even belong in the field, all the criticism handed out towards them, and then something clicks in Dayton where they just completely regain that confidence. But I don't even think regain's the right word. As I mentioned earlier, the Torvik stat, they've played like a top 15 type team in the country over the past month. So remember the North Carolina that we saw a long time ago, early in the season, people were thinking, all right, this is going to be, a top 10 team. They never got there, and they sort of struggled, midway through, basically through February 10. But since then, there are some elements of that team that maybe is what we thought they would be. So maybe I'm just trying to use the reverse mojo here because we know I'm going to do that a lot in the NCAA tournament with my picks for SEC teams. But I'm going to pick North Carolina, and I didn't expect to do that. So,
well, here's an interesting thing too. I'm looking back on February 15th. They beat Syracuse 88-82. They entered the game as the number 47 team in Ken Palm. They have stayed where they were or gone up in the rankings, up meaning a more favorable number, and they're 30. So for a month now, according to that predictive, they've improved every game for a month now. So take that for what it's worth. Maybe it's nothing.
They're also a 1.5 point favorite as the 11th seed.
Yeah.
So just notable. But I think it should be a great game. I think this is one of the better first-round games now that we've gotten the matchup. So for SEC teams, I think it's one of the best first-round matchups.
We'll be here to recap it when it's done. We're predicting all the outcomes for all the games involving SEC teams. To get that, subscribe to the channel. Enable
Bracket
notifications. Bracket bids. Check out Bracket
Free
Bids.
pick'em contest, start an auction draft league. Head over to Bracket Bids today. Download the app, find it there. If you want to set up a league, promo code SE16, 40% off. SE16, 40% off. BracketBids.com.
All right. Thanks for watching our content here at Southeastern 16. God bless you. We'll see you again soon with more of it.